What?
What's up?
Hey! That's Chris, by the way.
So excited about the baptisms.
It's gonna be the best.
Yeah.
Like, one of the best ways to start a day is by hanging out with this guy
And getting Panera
and,
bread.
getting Panera bread. That's what I'm talking about.
Exactly. Great.
Jared is hanging out with us today, working in the office. It's good stuff.
Actually read.
Dude, all right. So this guy, you're leaving. You're heading
Taking
out.
off, yep.
What was something that, some
Ooh.
kind of deep, wonderful wisdom that you gleaned this
Deep, wonderful
from the-
wisdom. Ooh.
Gonna baptize some people tonight. What?
What's up?
Hey! That's Chris, by the way.
So excited about the baptisms.
It's gonna be the best.
Yeah.
Yes. What has God called you to do? Today in day 320, we're looking at 1 Corinthians 5 through 8. I think as I was reading today, like kind of the way that the passage is working is in chapter 7. Now it's in the context of like marriage relationships, but Paul has this discourse about remaining in what God has called you to do. So, he says if you're married, remain in your marriage, and if you're single, he prays and wishes that people can remain in their singleness so that they can serve God better. But I think that idea of us being like figuring out what God has called us to do, I think really kind of trickles down with the rest of like chapter 8 and then chapter 6 and 5 in terms of what we see as followers of Jesus that we are called to do. Paul addresses some sexual immorality that was taking place in the church, and it's very clear that if we are going to follow Jesus, that part of that calling and following him is to abstain from sin. And the church, not only did they not abstain from it, but they actually were boasting, and it was really, really a weird, just kind of gross situation. Within the church, members were bringing lawsuits against one another, and if we are called by God, if we are following God, our calling is to not do that to one another, but to work out the differences, work out the issues like amongst ourselves in a church setting. With this question of what is it that God has called you to do, I think often immediately our mind goes to some kind of a special calling that God has given my life, like has God called me to be a teacher or an engineer or some business person or a pastor. Like we like to go after that first and figure out, God, what have you called me to do specifically in my life? And while we can get there at a certain point, before we get there, we need to follow and obey God in what we see in terms of our calling simply as a child of God from His Word. I think that if you really want to know God's purpose and plan for your life and what He's called you to, be faithful and obedient in the things that God has already clearly stated in His Word for you to follow. And very possibly as you're faithful to that, then God will reveal to you kind of maybe that more special calling in your life. And if you don't get that revelation from God, that's okay. The idea with God's Word and what we're called to do is that it's sufficient, it's enough, that as we follow God's Word, it's not so that we can get some kind of extra revelation of our calling, but we realize that God's Word is enough for us. The best way we can answer that question of what has God called me to do, what is my calling in life, the best way we can answer that is by looking into God's Word, reading God's Word, and following it. Was really good with those baptisms. I didn't film them because I just wasn't quite sure. Other people filmed them. I just thought it would be kind of a nice, close, intimate time with our group. But man, so proud of you, Luke and Anderson, getting baptized. Just really proud of you guys. Yeah, time to go home.